You've probably seen that meme about who led the transformation of your organization, your CFO, your CEO, or COVID by now. So welcome to this installment of Brave New World on ContextTV. COVID is this crazy occurrence, and in many ways, we cover pop culture and movies. It reminds me a bit of like when it comes to work in a workplace, without making light of anything. It's like Thanos snapped his finger, and there's two realities. Either you were affected overnight, suddenly, dramatically, and it just ceased your professional existence, unfortunately. If you work in a hotel and they're like, we're just shutting down. Or if you work in restaurants and they're like, we just can't serve people. Or in the airline industry. There's so many stories. First week there was 3 million who filed for unemployment. The next week there were 6. So over 10 million in the US alone. Canada was over 1 million. It's heartbreaking to see, and then you're on the other side and you are not affected the same way overnight. Like, sure, so at Watch Mojo we migrated to work from home, but make no mistake about it, everybody will get affected, and maybe you're in that second bucket, but you'll just feel the ripple effects over time, and there will be ripple effects. Sure, and absolutely, there is opportunity whenever stuff like this happens. There's an acceleration of events that would have happened anyway. If you're a retail operation, you were still spending big dollars in your retail presence. Now all of a sudden you're going to take e-commerce and fulfillment online a lot more seriously. If you're an advertiser, you're just going to think more online. There's less of a desire to put that money maybe on TV, or if there's no sports and whatnot. Diversification will change. That's a whole other video to do actually on this, how risk management takes on a whole new definition going forward. Let's just set all that aside. We've already started, but society is going to be undergoing a work from home revolution that until now, to be honest, a lot of people were kind of hesitant to even explore. I talk very candidly about, thoughts that cross people's minds that a lot of normal people can't say because they're afraid of what their boss would say, what their shareholders might think, what their board would think. And also it sounds bad to say certain things, but I say those things because I think, it's important to discuss them. Historically, it's weird because employers don't trust their employees. It's weird. It's like, why did you hire these people if you don't trust them to do their jobs? And there's always a few bad apples, sure, but ultimately, that's something that I found baffling. And then on the other side, I feel like a lot of employees don't trust their employers, their intentions, and also because, frankly, the difference between what you say, your intention, and how it's perceived is basically your actions and your words before, and just how you behave yourself. So sure, if you say something that's great, but then you don't follow it up with your actions, it's obvious people are not going to trust you, so to speak. So there's this lack of trust between employer and employee. And one of the reasons I started a business was because, I wanted to kind of like, maybe a bit naively, idealistically, I wanted to treat stakeholders a certain way, whether it was employees, whether it was clients, the community. And admittedly, it's hard to do that as you grow and there's more pressure. But whereas before, let's say if I wanted to say, why do we need to be 50 people at the office? Maybe we should just be 20 people working at the office who need to be at the office, 30 people can go from home. I myself as a human would be like, maybe it doesn't work. Maybe the 30 who show up to work from home, maybe they want to be in the office, and maybe the ones who show up to the office say, well, why can't I work from home? So then it starts to get very complicated, right? You realize, well, there's a lot of emotions and there's a lot of like jealousy and envy and resentment and people not understanding why you make certain decisions. And like for me, even I was like, it's fine. We just don't need to address that. Other companies, it does boil down to trust, right? Or if you work in, let's say you work for a video game maker, well, you're not going to let your employees randomly access your servers to play on this, awesome IP that you're afraid might get leaked, right? It's not that you don't trust your employees, it's just like a security risk. Same thing at banks, right? I mean, some banks were able to migrate and work from home and maintain full operational capacity, but I'm sure that some banks would just never really envision having 100% of their workforce work from home, and that means systems crash And it just disrupts, because if you're a client calling into your bank and your banker's like, I can't access my files for the next 6 hours because my shift is the noon to 4 time slot, it makes no sense, right? But so basically, indeed, COVID has forced this transformation, and we're going to undergo this revolution. So the question then is, okay, so COVID forces us to change our ways. Great. Is it business as usual? One of the first considerations that I have, not because I myself have 2 kids, aged almost 12 and 9, but just because you realize that right away, that there's a very big difference between how, not easy, but how seamless this can go if you have kids or not, in the backdrop of daycares are closed, schools are closed, there's no day camps. So right off the bat, I think if you are, whether you're work in HR, whether you're the CFO, whose role has dramatically changed post-COVID, or whether you're the CEO, or anybody really that manages other people, is you have to be realistic that it's not really business as usual if you have kids. If you have kids, you're basically multitasking throughout the day, changing your role as a parent, an employee, a human, yourself, either trying to work as if his life goes on, or whether you're anxious and stressed or just concerned about what your future holds because you may lose your job or whatnot. So I think that is one consideration. And even like double clicking on whether you have kids or not. If you have kids, it's a very big difference if you have a bunch of 2-year-olds versus a 10-year-old versus a 15-year-old. So I think realistically as a manager, you already have to take that into account. Now that doesn't mean that if you don't have kids and you're just working from home alone, that it's business as usual, because then you're alone, you're isolated, and then I would say maybe the mental and anxiety theme is maybe more important to think about. But that's one consideration. And I think everything boils down to those things. You have the physical health risk, which that's why you work from home, so you don't have to get into a bus and go to work and be with 50 other people. You want to reduce the physical risk. But the mental and anxiety and just the psychological aspect is just as important. And then the third pillar is the financial. Do I have a job? Can the company maintain operations? And then, as much as you want everybody to think of the big picture, realistically, employees are going to think about, what does this mean to me? I've always been very, very candid with the team and realistic that, I have to really always think about, how do employees think about this? Is it clear why I say or do something? How is this, transmitted, that word, how is this communicated to the team? And I put myself in their shoes, but they're ultimately always going to be like, well, what does this mean to me? I have sent emails saying, it's important to think of the team, it's important to think how this affects us and how it affects your colleagues. And I have a few people who reply to me literally like, well, what is the impact to me right now? And it's human nature. I think if you don't like that, don't start a business. Don't definitely go into the leadership business. The other dynamic that I look at are the 4 A's, which is, when these things happen, it's like, ideally you were aware of the risk. I don't know how many people were, we were all aware of the pandemic risk, and we probably all had read or seen, Bill Gates' TED Talk or a movie or the Time magazine cover, but nobody really went into 2020 thinking that, even though there were some murmurs about what was happening in the Wuhan region in China, nobody really took the risk as seriously as in hindsight, maybe they should have earlier on. And then the second one is to accept things, right? So after being the awareness, which most people don't have that awareness and foresight before, once something hits, you have to accept it. So I personally, accepted very quickly that this was going to change things. So I asked my team to devise a plan. And given our unique setup, it took us a few days to put forth the plan. But there were some companies that until very recently were trying to kind of head in the sand, thinking that they didn't want to accept it. And then the third one is to adapt. So you got to adapt, and you got to kind of be able to shift your operations, which is easier for some than others. And then finally you have to adjust, because once you start working from home, as I said, either because of the kid dynamic or other consideration, it's not business as usual. And an example I gave my team is I said, look, we need to empathize with one another, that maybe for the parents it's not a 9 to 5 kind of thing. Maybe it's you work a few hours, you take a break, you divide and conquer with your spouse. We can make it work, but we have to all accept that sure means you might need to email something later in the day because your team needs it, and you may need to work a little bit on the weekend to catch up or get something ready for a colleague without burning the candle at both ends and overdoing it. So my approach is always, like I said, just because I took a couple of psychology classes doesn't mean that I think I'm a psychology expert. But having taken a couple of psychology classes, like many others, I like that it explained a lot of like your insecurities and like the way you think about things. And so I've always been drawn to multiple theories, one of which is Freud's id, ego, superego framework. And I think when you, as a decision maker, as a leader, as a manager, whatever you want to look at it as, when you have to look at, well, what is that adapt and adjust reality? I think you can't be disingenuous and not admit that you go through these different state of minds, which are the id is basically like raw primal instincts. You don't care about protocols and mores and mores, you know, things that culture and others in society might think and feel. You're just an animal. You're just out there and you want to win and you want the results at any cost. And then at the other end of it, you have the superego. That's like the idealistic, altruistic, kumbaya, don't work, just sleep all day, play with your kids, everything will be fine, no expectation, which, you know, is wishful thinking, because at the end of the day, you're running an organization and you don't take anything for granted, because think of that Thanos line, you're the fortunate ones that are responsible to society to get us to the road to recovery. And so neither one, as you could imagine, I always talk about balance. I struggle myself with balance, but I definitely am aware that balance is the key to thrive and survive, let alone survive to thrive. So the balance is the ego. The ego is ultimately balances the crazy instincts of the id with the altruistic nonsense, which I'm more personally into, of the superego. You know, overall, we ran a couple of surveys just because maybe I was bored, but maybe I wanted to relay to the team that these are ways for you to give us feedback. And the majority of the team, overwhelming, 92%, said that they were equally or even more productive working from home. Now, maybe there's a few people that say that because they think they have to say that, but realistically, the numbers were pretty stark. One person did say that, like, well, you know, can we kind of like maybe just calm down a little bit? And I'm like, look, just give us feedback. You know, what is it? Is it a technical thing that we could help with? Is there software we could get to help you? Do you need another screen? Do you need a better mouse, a better chair? Like, just, that's part of the communication here. But yeah, I think that as a leader, you want to balance the id, which may be a bit wishful thinking, that it's business as usual, with the superego, that everything is fine and we could accommodate and we could totally just forget about work, because at the end of the day, the economy does need to keep humming, otherwise then everything could crash down. So ultimately, I think when it comes to what happens then afterwards. So eventually we did a video on the return to normalcy, and I think that does take a lot of time, but there are a lot of HR professionals who are not like, you know, representatives of employees. HR represents the company. So there's a lot of HR people now that are kind of like planning and plotting and thinking, well, how do we basically take the lessons and the learnings and going forward, maybe not have an office even, or maybe have a smaller office? Why pay for all that rent and all of the things that are indirectly added onto your P&L? Which then also, now it's not just a risk, we said, it's not just a TED Talk by Bill Gates or a magazine cover on time. If you get thousands of people together under a roof, you also increase the risk of disease, which then have spillover effects. And it's not just a cold, it's a pandemic, right? So it kind of changes the stakes a little bit. And so I think ultimately, when the new normal returns, whenever that is, I think you're going to see this brave new world where, believe it or not, I think more employees will wish to get back to work, get a bit of space from their kids who are now back to school, where they kind of can go and socialize and talk to other humans and kind of get into a routine where it's actually a bit more structured and there's a clear delineation between work, this place that is a third party that I go to. I don't sleep there at night. My kids don't pop into a video behind me. And strangers who then go back into their huts at the end of the day, and then I only see them the day after. I think that will be far more likely than employers who are like, oh my God, I can't trust these employees. I need to surveil them and monitor them. Especially since something like 85% of employers actually do monitor their employees' work. I think what you will see is The employees who simply were not doing their work and slacking off, it'll just be easier for companies to part ways with them, frankly. But I think it's more likely that the employees will want to get back to a common place of work than the employers will want to get everybody back under a roof. I think a lot of employers are going to do the math and just go through the pros and cons and say, you know what? We probably don't need to have every single employee, unless there's like security risks and there's some intangibles. Sometimes it's just not possible. But I think that's the most likely scenario. So ultimately, I don't see this. I don't see this going back to normal anytime soon. But when it does, I think it will have dramatically accelerated and revolutionized the whole concept of work, physical office space. And what is work in the end? It's like busyness. Business is busyness. It's something you do to stay busy. And I think that the takeaway here is the entire premise of an office is really just a place to escapism. It's something to give you a structured routine. Same way that people still were going to the gym because it was just getting out of the house and going. I think, that's also going to change amongst many other things. Anyway, so how do you see this happening? Do you think that it will eventually go back to normal the way it was? Or do you agree with my assessment that more employees will want to go back to work in a common office than employers wanting to bring all their employees back under that one same roof?